Hey guys, Hop here. Why do we buy guns? After all, they're expensive. Acquiring them often forces you to jump through regulatory hoops, and finding a place to actually shoot your guns is surprisingly difficult for a lot of people. And yet, we seem to be buying an awful lot of these things. The answer's pretty obvious. Outside of collectors and people who shoot purely for sporting purposes, it's because you think someday something bad might happen, and having a firearm may help you out. And therein lies the rub. What's going to happen? When is it going to happen? What kind of firearm is going to help you out in that situation? And everybody, whether or not they've really thought about it consciously or talked about it or admitted it to themselves, has a scenario in mind. Because if you don't have a scenario in mind, how could you possibly know if you're making the right purchasing decisions or setting your guns up in the right way? The most basic version of this is simple self-defense, having a firearm to protect your home or carrying a firearm to protect yourself in public. But I think we all know that for a lot of people it doesn't end there, because otherwise it would be very difficult to justify 80% of the stuff that's sitting to either side of me right now. Wow, that's incredibly blue. My preferred energy drink is usually Monster Rehab Yellow, but a couple times recently I've gotten them and they've tasted weird. Alright, so we're starting to pare the group down a little bit. We've already discounted collectors. They're allowed to buy whatever they like, whenever they want, for whatever reason. Go with God, my friend. We've also basically eliminated sport shooters, because basically whatever type of sport you're doing is going to dictate the type of thing that you purchase, and that's pretty easy to figure out. If you want to hunt, you follow the local hunting regulations. You want to get into PRS or USPSA or anything like that, they've got a pretty extensive list of things that you can and cannot shoot, and that makes it pretty clear cut. You find out what guns you're allowed to shoot, what gear you're allowed to run, and then you just try to get the best version of that, or what works the best for you. So that leaves us with all of the guys that you might consider to be on the prepper side of the equation. But prepping for what? That's the real question that I wanted to get into today, because I think for a lot of guys, they have conjured a dream or ideal apocalypse scenario, and they're preparing for that with no real way of knowing for sure if the scenario is going to take place, and if they would actually be well suited for it, since a lot of these scenarios are essentially unprecedented. There are a lot of guys out there who are interested in setting up tactical rifles, LBE, body armor, all sorts of gear for certain contingencies. And those contingencies can range from, the classic grid down end of the world situation, or maybe it's the Civil War thing from that A24 movie. Maybe it's the classic Red Dawn scenario updated to be about Chinese paratroopers instead of Soviet ones, or maybe it's the classic uprising defending against a tyrannical regime scenario. People in this community get pretty heated about what constitutes a good rifle or a good rifle setup, or what's a sensible choice of kit, body armor, load-bearing equipment, how many mags. And usually they're so passionate about that because they've built a kit that they think perfectly suits the scenario they have in their head. There's also the tendency of a lot of guys in this so-called community to play by Price is Right rules. So anybody who is less prepared than me is just completely inefficient, and anybody who is prepared beyond what I have done is just a lunatic. This is also why I tend to think there's no such thing as a firearms community. Rather, there are a bunch of communities that peripherally involve firearms. You could be, a Civil War prepper guy, and firearms are part of your, I'll call it a hobby, not in an offensive way. And another guy whose main concern is neighborhood defense in the case of, a disaster with long-term power outages. Both of these guys have an AR, and they want to set it up in a practical way that would suit the disaster of their dreams, but of course that's going to depend largely on which of those disasters actually occurs. Who is prepping for the correct apocalypse? That question is probably beyond the scope of a simple YouTube video about guns, but we can still talk about some different ways that gun and gear purchasing and setup advice is influenced a lot by speculation. Let's get into it. Today's video is brought to you by our channel sponsor, Blue Alpha, who makes gun belts for all conceivable scenarios. I've been wearing their hybrid EDC belt every single day for years, but they also make 2-layer battle belts, which you can set up for competition use, duty use, or any kind of hypothetical future scenario. Blue Alpha also has pistol and rifle magazine pouches, dump pouches, and a new IFAK pouch that comes in both a horizontal and vertical format. Check them out at the link in the video description. Thank you to Blue Alpha for their continued support of this show. Thank you guys for watching. Let's get back into it. Alright, let's work our way up this speculation pyramid. At the bottom, we have sports shooting, which is almost 100% quantifiable. This encompasses hunting and all forms of competition shooting. In sports shooting, you have a limited pool of options to choose from. The arbitrary restrictions in competition are a bit of a tell. If they won't let you use magazines over a certain size in USPSA divisions, that's a good indicator that higher capacity is a good thing. So what do? You push the envelope, get the heaviest gun and the biggest magazine you can fit into the box. Hunting regulations that require a minimum caliber size let you know that getting a rapid, ethical kill often demands more energy on target. These disciplines also provide immediate feedback on what works and what doesn't. Lost a match? Didn't fill your tag? That's something to work on. Then we get into defensive firearms, starting with home defense. This is mostly uncontroversial. Even Joe Biden is in favor of a limited form of home defense. There is some wiggle room for argumentation surrounding what constitutes enough. Just buy a double-barrel shotgun or a suppressed Shorty 300 Blackout AR. Is body armor necessary for home defense? Is it even viable? Would you realistically have time to put it on? This is the first time we encounter scenarios. Are you preparing for a simple burglary gone awry, or a home invasion with multiple determined aggressors? This stuff may be rare, but it does happen, even in the United States. Beyond that, we have concealed carry weapons for personal defense. This is still fairly uncontroversial, even though it's possible to find people who are in favor of home defense guns, but not concealed carry. Those people are silly, and we don't like them. Is it enough to simply have a gun and check that box, or do you need to worry about caliber, capacity, spare magazines, weapon lights, and red dots? Do we go off the tired old 3 shots in 3 seconds at 3 feet rule, or the FBI 7-yard mean engagement rule, or a full-on statistical breakdown of civilian-involved shootings that suggests even a single missed shot will solve almost any problem? Some guys carry a 5-shot snub nose and call it good. Other guys feel undergunned when they don't have a spare 21-rounder for their Roland Special Glock with an X300 Turbo and an Acro P2. There are also proponents and detractors of truck guns or bag guns. Plausible scenarios at this level include attempted robberies, mass shootings, or terrorist attacks. Concealed carriers have stopped all of these things in this country before. Now we're getting into the realm of preparing for stuff that hasn't happened here before. There are 2 problems with that. We're trying to predict what might happen and what the ramifications of that event might be. If you want to nail this one, you're going to have to get a lot of variables right. Way, way, way beyond anything discussed previously. And yet there seem to be a lot of guys who are convinced they know what's going to happen, like they're making an accusation in a game of Clue. Chinese paratroopers in the Appalachians with the civilian auto rifle. There's a difference between preparing for a temporary loss of water, power, and grocery services and preparing for a full-blown grid-down scenario. The former is basically just home defense plus body armor and a few extra canned goods. The latter would require you to think critically about what calibers to stockpile. A practical AR setup would be great for short-term community defense, but if the power grid is literally never coming back online, maybe you should focus on stockpiling efficient calibers like 22 long rifle and flexible utility firearms like 12-gauge shotguns. Somewhere between those 2 extremes is where we find all the hypothetical scenarios that involve conflict with a near-peer enemy. Here's a few examples of 2 things that are very popular with the more Minutemen-oriented guys that I don't necessarily agree with myself. First, the use of lens covers and kill flashes on everything. If you think you'll be fighting a guerrilla action against a near-peer force, this makes sense. I've got lens covers for a few of my weapon lights, but I don't bother to put them on everything. If I seriously believed this kind of scenario was imminent, I probably would take more steps to cover up my light and optic lenses. However, it's also something that could be easily improvised on short notice if I ever needed it. The second thing I see a lot is a rejection of active aiming for night vision, because an opponent with night vision would be able to see your downrange signature. This is specifically an insistence on using passive aiming only, not just having passive aiming capability, but going so far as to omit a laser aiming module or IR illuminator on the gun. I don't care what scenario you're in, I think if you can afford it and if you can fit it on the gun, you should have some kind of IR illuminator if you're going to be using nods. We don't omit the white light on our gun just because our opponents may have eyeballs. We shouldn't omit the IR light just because our opponents may have nods. You just need to use it intelligently and sparingly like you would any source of visible light. If you talk to a serious gun guy for a while, you'll figure out what their dream scenario is. And the thing is, none of them are right, at least not yet. If you're preparing for a hypothetical future scenario, the only 2 things you can be are wrong or potentially right. But when and if shit ever pops off, the waveforms will collapse, and a lot of people will become wrong really quick. The question is, how do people come to these conclusions? Is it careful contemplation and a study of trends? After the war in Ukraine really ratcheted up, there was a notable influx of online discourse about how magnified optics and laser modules were useless in trench warfare. Even if we accept that is true, it's still only useful information if you expect to end up in trench warfare. Is prepping for Ukraine-style trench warfare really any different than the US military adopting the 6.8x51 cartridge just in case we end up in Afghanistan again?
Yeah. What kind of piece of shit gun doesn't work without ammo in it?
All right.
The military really wasted their money on this one.
Sometimes I get the sense from these conversations that guys are prepping for a scenario that they like the sound of, or put another way, the story they want to be a part of. Debt-ridden millennials, for example, love the idea of a second Dark Age. I mean, if the grid goes down, that's basically like student loan forgiveness, and you'll never have to join an all-hands Zoom call ever again. I don't really have a clear mission statement for this channel, and I get a lot of comments from people who seem confused about why I do this stuff. It's pretty basic. I like firearms and I like gear. I like shooting and learning how to use this stuff. But I don't know what the future holds any more than you do, so I try to keep it pretty general. It's pretty common to hear advice like, for the average civilian, a basic AR with a red dot is all you will ever realistically need. And that statement is almost overwhelmingly likely to be correct. And as Nuttin' Fancy once reminded us, don't hasten the day. I think it's a good idea to be prepared for multiple contingencies, but at the same time, once my stockpile of contact lenses runs out, I won't be of much use to anyone. So maybe I'm a lot more invested into shares of Nothing Ever Happens than you, but there are a lot of Zero Hedge subscribers out there with a more diverse portfolio. Alright, that's all for today. I'll end this call early and give you a few minutes of your time back. Now go to the comments section. Be free. See you next time.
So where'd you come from, brother? 6? Call you 6, okay? And we'll figure out something to do with you, okay? Yeah. You are a good dog, my goodness.